Welcome to the Silicon Slopes show. Last one of the week. Excited to be joined by Dan Lambert, who's GM of Technology at Sonic Healthcare. How are you, Dan?
Hey, great. Good. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited for this because you're in a field that everyone touches at some point in their lives or weeks. And folks like you always have valuable insights as to what really happens on the other side of the counter and in the medical process. But let's set the table with a little bit of your background leading into where you are currently with Sonic Healthcare, because you've had a lot of success over the years as an entrepreneur, but culminating with the Sonic Healthcare acquisition of Pathology Watch. What led to that?
Yeah, so my background's in computer engineering. I was here at BYU, and I specialized in AI and a lot of computer science elements as well, and then went to Harvard for business school. Since then, I've been a serial entrepreneur most of my career, so this is my third venture-backed startup. Fortunately, all three have had pretty successful exits, so it's been a fun run, and I've also been pretty lucky too.
Oh, well, good for you, and it is good to acknowledge luck every once in a while, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of hard work and some skill go into that, but it's better to be lucky than good sometimes, and timing is important, and having a great network is important as well. Pathology Watch was your last one, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, I was working on that for about 7 years before acquisition.
And where did that idea come from? Where did the courage to do it come from? Because it's one thing to have a SaaS software, but it's another thing to deal with healthcare and big problems. So where did the idea come from, and how did you guys found that, raise the money, and get it going?
Yeah, this one was tricky because we needed to raise enough capital to support building out the labs as well as the research and development, a lot of hardware costs associated with that, and then also developing the software to do all of this. But how I really got into this was looking at the state of pathology, how it was 7 years ago before we existed. And the reality was it was mostly microscopes and fax machines, and it was a very slow process and very cumbersome. And if you're a cancer patient, there's no way that your case can get looked at by 4 or 5 different doctors at the same time, or you're just waiting for that fax to come back to the office. And when you see something that's that far in the past, where this should have been updated 20 years ago, it's kind of a no-brainer that the system needs to be rebuilt. And so the innovation that we brought more than anything to pathology is connecting up the systems that operate inside of the laboratory, the software that controls the laboratory, a digital viewer to actually view the pathology that your primary care physician or your dermatologist could see, as well as the pathologist, and then connecting that up with all the electronic medical record systems that are up there and then out there. And this is we were one of the very first ones to actually put all those pieces together in a way that worked.
Yeah. So the listeners are not hearing that incorrectly. You said faxes and microscopes.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and I think people don't realize probably about 80% of pathology before we were here was like faxes and microscopes.
Yeah.
And replacing that with even just a computer is a big step forward in healthcare.
Yeah, because people oftentimes, maybe because of the commercials and the propaganda, and then when they go into a hospital, it looks pretty darn squared away, and it looks like it's got a lot of fancy stuff, and they associate healthcare and innovation with cutting edge, but it's clearly not in some instances.
It's definitely not. I think the commercials show a very different picture than what's really going behind the scenes, especially in areas that have not progressed in a long time, like pathology.
Yeah. So you see this issue, and it's ripe for disruption, and you're going to apply, obviously what you've learned at HBS and these other startups. But just to set the table real quick, your doctor thinks there might be an issue. You get blood drawn in the old way. Somebody looks at it in a microscope and thinks, yeah, there's cancer or there's an issue. They fax over something to another doctor, and that's when the process starts. Is that
Yeah.
Semi-accurate. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. So, whether your physician is removing a blood sample or a piece of tissue like skin or another body part, depending on what they think is there, and that tissue goes to a laboratory where the tissue's cut into really thin slices. And then stain is added to those slices so that the human eye, or in our case, a computer, can look at or analyze the image and make determinations. And that is there's logistics and supply chain and kind of everything that goes into moving those cancer samples around. But one of the big innovations that we brought to the industry is having an algorithm, and this is a study that we published last year, January 2023. We were able to show that our melanocytic detector was over 99.5% sensitive at picking up melanomas at the pathology level. And so if you're a physician potentially looking at one of these cases, having an AI that's that precise or that able to catch really dangerous conditions, it's very helpful and a lot safer if you're a patient.
Yeah. So now you've mentioned AI, which everyone loves and everyone's an expert on now, but 7 years ago, not so much.
Yeah, I think we were working on this or doing a lot of research way before it was a hot topic, kind of as these things go. I mean, a lot of the other AI technology that we're hitting the market was also started 6-7 years ago, and it's just, we're now peaking now as these things are introduced to the market.
Yeah, but it's cool to see like a real world application. I mostly use AI to help figure out the best way to plant my garden, right? But you guys are using it for quicker, more accurate, better diagnoses for ultimately the patient.
Yeah, and also hopefully in the long run, cheaper diagnoses as well. That's the end goal. Kind of our mission as a company is to improve the quality of care while also reducing the cost. And this is actually a very good problem for AI. So if you think about the state of AI, especially neural networks, what it's really good at is looking at a lot of factors inside of an image or text and coming up with a weighting of what's really important inside of that image, or identifying a lot of different features within that image. And so the future of AI for cancer research is not only in making that initial call of, hey, this looks like a lot like other melanomas that we've seen in the past. It's also about looking at those features and saying, oh, this patient is a lot like this other patient that we had 5 years ago. That metastasized, or that was a very dangerous case. And so we need to treat this particular cancer way more aggressively. And the AI has capabilities like that to correlate over large amounts of data, process large amounts of the image and look at thousands of inner variables or inner weightings to determine what matters and what doesn't. And that's going to allow us to make much better predictions on what exactly the course of treatment should be, what drug the patient should have. Does this patient really need this super aggressive treatment, or can they avoid that altogether? Because we see patients overtreated all the time. That's very common in cancer.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to like the media portrayals, there's always like an instance in a medical drama where the doctor is thinking about a patient, and they go home and they're drinking scotch or whatever it is, and like their brain registers, oh, I remember 6 years ago there was a similar patient, and they run and get the file and they're like, oh yeah, it was similar, right? But that's tough to scale and tough to expect.
Yeah, and that should be done. That absolutely should be done algorithmically. Fortunately, the company that acquired us has such large repositories of data going back many, many years, seeing many different types of cases that we're able to correlate, over much more data than what a human could ever hold possibly in their head. And that's how you get progress in medicine right now is, looking at much bigger patient populations.
Yeah. You mentioned at the beginning, this is a lot different in the startup costs, right? I'm seeing you guys like hustling a lot. You've got to convince the labs and the hospitals, the insurers, validate that it works, all sorts of stuff. So where do you start with like an enterprise like this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's one of those step you have to complete a lot of steps along the way. So we started with developing the algorithm, just bootstrapping, proving that the concept could even work. And then going to venture capitalists. We had a lot of local Utah VCs, which were very supportive. A number of them, which I had worked with before, and that's really helpful. So even if they think it's a kind of out there idea, they're like, well, all right, Dan is running it. We're gonna give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, always a good thing.
And so we raised our first round of capital, and then we actually acquired a small laboratory and grew it. Once we had the laboratory, we were able to get on certain insurance contracts, and once we had certain insurance contracts, then we were able to sell or convince dermatologists and other practitioners to send us volume. And then the flywheel just kind of started. And then as we were able to show insurance reimbursements, then we had a lot more interest from venture capitalists, and we could expand our lab capacity, et cetera.
Okay. And the dermatologist, you brought that up a few times. Is that kind of the bread and butter of?
Yeah, probably about 60% of our business is actually dermatologists in Utah. So we have a very large footprint here. And so if you're listening to this and you go and get a skin biopsy, it most likely is going through one of our labs. We run a fairly decent sized facility in Murray, Utah, that does a lot of the processing, and then we also do the digitization of the cases there as well.
Okay. So instead of sending faxes back and forth, let's say the doctor does want a second opinion from a colleague or somebody they went to medical school with or something like that. Instead of like sending faxes back and forth, they could, if they're on the platform, they could look and analyze and co-decide.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a lot of that going on every day in our world that just simply wasn't possible before. And so the way that it works is we embed a link to that digital image that everybody can look at into, whether it's the primary care or the dermatologist electronic medical record system. They can just click on a link, and then it pulls up the image with all the different zoom levels so they can see it. They can see output from algorithms. They can see what another human diagnosed it as. And actually, for the first time, patients can see the image of their tumor, and that's never been possible before. So we have a number of dermatology clinics here in Utah where the dermatologist does show the patient and say, oh, look, there's still tumor here. We're going to go in and operate, or we need to do some other treatment because this is what's going on. So it really helps reassure the patient that, oh, the doctor's not just making this up. Having a visual or a picture's worth 1,000 words, right?
Yeah.
And it's a lot like it feels like that moment when people were seeing radiology for the first time, 50 years ago, and patients could see their bones. Now it's patients can see, oh, that's my cancer.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. The picture's worth 1,000 words, because oftentimes, the doctor leaves the room and you're like, hey, they could just be out there watching YouTube videos.
Yeah.
For all I know.
Well, yeah, and also, digital enables the doctors to collaborate. Sometimes these cases, pathology is a little bit art. It's probably 90% science, and then there's 10% just open to interpretation. And the fact that pathologists can get together where 5 or 6 of them are looking at a case and come to a consensus. We actually have we call them daily stand-ups for the physicians, where they get together and they talk about their hardest cases. And that improves the quality of the physician, but it also makes for a much better patient experience. And so just moving that forward or facilitating the communication is really important. Another aspect of the system that's also really important is that the physician can leave notes behind or annotations or things in digital that weren't possible before, that you can say, hey, look at this, like pay attention to this. There's something odd going on here,
Yeah.
and or correct problems that happen inside the lab in a way that just never could happen before.
Yeah. And so it's kind of a reverse of machine learning back to the human level. They get to improve their skill set, improve their, muscle memory when it comes to looking and diagnosing, because they get to talk to their colleagues and look at clearer images and all of that. It ultimately makes them quicker and better too.
Yeah, it does. And I think we're at a period of time where you really need both. You need both man, you need both man and machine if you're going to provide optimal care.
Yeah.
And I think it's that way for, probably a decade. And the reality is that in our January study that I referenced, I mean the AI is performing extremely well on classification, like kind of in the ballpark of a human, but it misses very different. Humans and machines miss very different things, and it's because they're built a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And so it's not uncommon for AI, especially in the field of pathology, to have a problem of if a slide is blurry or there's an artifact or fold on the tissue. The AI has a hard time. It will just say, "Oh, I didn't find cancer," instead of saying, "Oh, there's a problem with this slide."
Yeah.
Whereas a human will say, "No, kick that back. There's something wrong, or somebody did something wrong in the process."
Yeah.
Whereas what a human is likely to miss is they initially see like a tumor that's benign, but there could be something very malignant or dangerous somewhere in the case, but it's really tiny, or it's really emerging. And the AI is going to pick up that pattern because it's looking at every single pixel. And so that's why from our perspective this is a collaboration, or the AI should remain as an assistant for quite a long time, because this is people's lives.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And then if you're going to get snarky and like cold-blooded capitalist about it, like you can't replace dermatologists all across America and the world, or there'd be some issues with unemployment, right? Like I would maybe in 50 years still want that human involved.
Yeah. And I think that there's especially, and this is a very common thing, by the way, so most people don't realize this, but 40% of us will get cancer at some point in our lifetime. Like and actually those numbers are increasing. We're not sure exactly why, but in Utah in particular, we have a much higher skin cancer rate than the national average, and so we see a lot of very dangerous cases here, and there will need to be a human component, because you're suddenly making that patient's day the worst day of their life, like getting that day of cancer diagnosis. In fact, you're kind of stunned all of a sudden into, well, what do I do now? Or there's kind of that sinking feeling of, well, where do we go from here? And I have a hard time seeing that being delivered by an AI.
Yeah.
And people have a lot of questions almost immediately or as they process it, and you need to have a human as part of that process.
Yeah. I can envision, like the AI's giving you the diagnosis and you ask a follow-up question and gives you like a dry, calculated analytical answer, and a lot of computers get thrown through the window, right? Like the person's just enraged. Gotta have that human element.
And especially in our research, the AI produces a number, the number comes back and it's like 0.723. That doesn't really mean anything to a patient, but that's that's what the algorithm determined as a scoring for each of these tumors. And so there's a big gap between the kinds of things that AI is able to do, and it does it very well, versus kind of what needs to happen in the patient interaction.
Yeah, for sure. Impressive and very, very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the acquisition from Sonic Healthcare, and then I do want to talk about healthcare in general with just your opinion. But you guys are onto something. You get through the building phase and you're scaling. How long did it take for folks to come knocking on the door and show interest?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we started getting inbound interest from clients specifically from dermatologists about 2.5 years in. So and word actually travels very fast in the healthcare community of like, oh, you have the ability to see this image, or like, oh, this is. And I think in this case, pathology going digital, they kind of expected this for a long time, and they just were waiting for a company to do it. So I don't think it was a shock to the system, and so we had a lot of inbound demand from people expecting that. And also because dermatologists can read they're board certified to read their own cases if they wanted to, and so I think there was a lot of demand coming from them of, hey, can I look at the cases, or I don't want just that faxed report. I actually want to look at what's going on here so I can treat the patient better. And so when you see something that can drastically increase patient care, doctors usually do adopt that kind of technology quickly, where it's a real need, and so that happened on short order. It took a little bit longer for the venture capitalists to understand what we had built, and it's probably in part because it's a this is not something that you think about every day. This is like software. This is 30-year-old software that operates inside of a lab that you have to connect up with something very modern, whether it's algorithms or detection or whatever. And so but eventually the VCs understood that we had really rebuilt all of the plumbing for pathology, and that was a very powerful asset. And then I think, for listeners in general, why does VC matter? In a lot of ways, the venture capitalists that were investing in the business, they helped validate the business, and two, they helped set valuations so that when we got to the acquisition point, the acquirer was able to look back at the history, and we already had a robust data room, strong valuations from many different parties, and the market had spoken, so to speak. And so, I think sometimes VCs get a bad rep, but they were very, very helpful to us in building the business, and we really needed the capital to bring about something this important.
Yeah. All right. So you've got all these chainsaws juggling, and ultimately, it's going to be your decision. But Sonic Healthcare reaches out, or some sort of marriage is proposed, and you've got to make the decision of, this is the right time and this is the right opportunity. How do you go about that decision?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because you have two competing forces. One is you think that there is there's a multi-billion-dollar business here, especially as we were starting to see in a research capacity, the AI very much seeing years into the future for these cancers, and you realize this is a new category that's emerging, and we're out in front. We're leading the effort here, and then trading that with there's a company that wants to buy this now. They can implement the technology in 20 different countries. We could make a big impact very quickly. And so we had to make this decision both from a financial capacity as well as what helps the most humans the fastest. And so in the case of joining a company that you had a $13 billion market cap company that has a ton of labs, where you think that you can bring the technology in and help improve their processes and the plumbing for these labs, hopefully improve patient safety, all of those aspects, or you can keep slogging it out for another 10 years. And I think it was very much a personal decision of what's best for the patient. And all of the physicians on our team were pretty unanimous that we're going to make the most impact by joining a bigger company and deploying the technology in that footprint. And that's a different equation than, some of the venture capitalists that were a little bit disappointed. They're out looking for lottery tickets, right? And so, even a solid, $150 million exit, not the multi-billion-dollar outcome that they were hoping for. And so you have to kind of balance some of those interests sometimes.
Yeah. That is really unique, right? Because this isn't some software that helps you figure out when to buy your shoes, right? Even if that's a $10 billion valuation, nobody really needs it. It's just nice to have. But you guys had a much deeper question there of what would help actual people.
Yeah, and then also kind of what matters in life, right? We don't, we just don't live forever, and especially when you're seeing patients day in and day out every day, you're thinking, okay, how can we grow what we have into something much bigger? And that's always been a driving force for us, and I've been fortunate to work with people that always put that first ahead of anything else, really. Yeah.
Commendable. That's really, really cool. That should be a book or case study just on itself. It's a unique thing. So how has it gone? Team out of Murray, and now it's an Australian publicly traded company, right? So kind of weird.
Yeah, it's a little bit, it's definitely different. When you're used to, as a startup, you're used to making all the decisions and very quick judgments. And, now you're dealing with a lot more, overhead and machinery, but also a lot more opportunity at the same time.
Yeah.
And so we've been acquired for about 6 months now, and we're still, figuring out how to take the technology that we've developed and put it into other laboratories. It's an exciting journey, but a challenging one too. And that change is always hard, whether it's inside of a large company or outside. There's definitely a change management component that comes with a new generation of technology, where I think everybody understands that in 5 years this is just the way that it will be done. But how do we get from here to where that inflection point is?
Yeah. And with somebody like you, that's obviously usually the smartest one in the room, I would imagine. They wanted you and everyone else at your company and all the work that you've done. So what's it like to figure out what your role is going to be going forward? How do you guys kind of decide mutually, like, all right, this is where I'll fit in, and here's what I'm going to do?
Yeah. In a lot of ways, it was really nice because I get to go back to what I do best, which is running the technology team. And so I focus a lot more now on future research and development. And now, instead of in a startup as a CEO, you're accounting and HR, and you had 10 different aspects. And it's very nice for me to just get back to working on the tech and recruiting, and which, by the way, we are hiring engineers right and left. So if anybody's interested in working on this kind of problem, please reach out.
Yeah, seems like a good opportunity.
Yeah, and it's meaningful work. Like we build things, and those items or those improvements get deployed in the lab within a month. And so you get to really see the impact of what you're doing.
Yeah, very cool. So I get the sense that there was a little relief, right? Of like, I don't have to worry about accounting and finance anymore. I'm going to go back to what I enjoy. So that's got to be liberating, right? Like, you've had the success with the exit, and now you get to focus on what you enjoy.
Yeah. And, there's also a relief of, you don't have, we had probably about 100 people on our cap table, a lot of funds, but then also individual, angel investors that came along for the ride. And there's a lot of management of that, and then, management of 100 plus employees and all of that. And for me, it's definitely a sense of relief of, okay, yeah, let's get back to the tech.
Yeah, good for you. Healthcare in general. We have folks on the show that are involved in healthcare and in all sorts of capacities. That might be a startup, it might be a benefits provider, and rarely is it talked about in a good way, right? At least in America, it's amazing in a lot of ways, but it's also like, it's broken and it's proving pretty tricky to fix. What are your thoughts on just the macro healthcare environment?
It's a really good question, and I this could be a day-long conversation, but at least from a technology perspective, some of the things that I'm really excited about that are coming. In AI, there are two aspects. There's training, where it's ingesting tons of data, and then there's inference, where it's the algorithm that's running every time to give you the output. We're finding that the cost, especially of inference, of doing any kind of AI, that cost is coming way down. And so that can enable anything from universal language translators, which actually the hospitals really need, to really like quick diagnoses that are localized, instead of needing to go and like pull big resources from the cloud. And so it's an exciting moment where some of those changes are coming. And then on the research side, the reality is that the neural networks will have more capacity than the human brain within about 5 to 6 years. And so rather than researchers taking a single hypothesis and going and testing that, we'll no longer be limited by our biology to go and do these amazing research projects that can ingest way more data and see way more patterns than what we're capable of. And so there's a lot of tech, and we're seeing kind of some early innings of that right now, but it'll take a few years to get there. In terms of health tech, in terms of healthcare overall, I mean, there's always this tricky relationship between payers and providers and the patient that's trying to navigate a system. We are starting to see some electronic medical record systems interoperability or interchangeability, like that's kind of starting to improve. But the reality is it's still very difficult, and I feel for patients that are trying to still navigate this very tough environment. My suggestion is, if you're a patient, always get a second opinion. You don't know, where necessarily your case has gone, or if someone's going to have a different perspective, and or treatments are coming out, new treatments, especially in cancer, they're coming out literally every day. And so, staying on top and talking to, other physicians that may have a different perspective, that's what I would do as a patient personally.
Yeah. Really, really interesting. You mentioned you guys are hiring engineers. Would these be hardware and software, AI?
Mostly software. So actually, more than anything, we're recruiting for front end engineers, mostly React, and it's in part because as you develop these tools, you need ways for the physicians and the lab techs to interact with with this great technology that's coming out. And so we spend a lot of time, modifying the interface to exactly what the physician wants or enables them to be better, faster, move through more cases. And so if someone likes really, understanding a complex interaction, like what goes on here, I think this is a great opportunity to work on something exciting.
Oh, for sure. Well, kudos to you and your team. I've really enjoyed this conversation here, Dan. We could talk for a long time about this because you've seen it and done it, and I think you're pretty good about looking into the future of all of this. So it'll be fun to watch what y'all do, and congrats again. All right, that's it for this week. Monday's guest is Camille and Grace Weston, who are the co-founders of Nona Rose. Hope everyone has a great weekend. Thanks again, Dan.
Thank you.